My name is Lauren Smith, and on behalf of the Early Stage Anesthesia Scholars, we want to welcome you today to Scholars Day 2021. We're all very excited that you've chosen to give us some of your time this Saturday, and we hope that you really find the presentations that we've put together really helpful and beneficial to you all. I'm not able to go forward. Can we advance the slide? Thank you. Early Stage Anesthesia Scholars is an organization whose mission is to serve the interests of early career anesthesiologist scientists by providing an academic home for developing scholars in anesthesiology. Forward slide. Our goals are to foster peer and senior mentorship in both career and scientific topics, to support the needs and interests of young professionals interested in an academic career in anesthesiology, to enhance peer networking and collaborative opportunities and encourage the sharing of enthusiasm and ideas among its members, and to develop and implement strategies at an institutional, regional, national, international level that support the retention of anesthesiologist scientists in career-oriented tracks and to reduce attrition. Slide forward. If you're not yet a member and you're interested in learning more about us or joining our organization, we would welcome all of you to join us. You can find out more information at our website shown here. Forward. And before we get started with our program today, just some road rules for all of us. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. That way we can attend to whoever is. If you have any questions for the speakers, and we hope that you do, they can be added in the chat function at any time during the meeting. And we'll have designated question and answer times at the end of most of our panels and presentations where we can present those questions to our speakers. There are scheduled breaks throughout the day, but please feel free to take breaks when you need them. We know that it's a long program. However, please turn off your video if you're going to carry the meeting along with you. Video tours of your house or hospital are incredibly interesting, but also very distracting. Also, if you could turn off your video just during panel presentations or speakers, it can help us all kind of focus on them as well. But as Kristen said, during the other areas, we'd love to see your face. We'd love to get to know you better. Back one slide. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce the three speakers of our first panel. Our first panel is Finding Your Academic Path, a discussion of academic career alternatives. And we have three great speakers today. The first is Dr. Mark Stafford-Smith from Duke University Medical Center. And he will discuss with us today building an academic career in anesthesiology focused on education. He graduated from McGill University Medical School, completed his internship and residency at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. He then traveled to Duke University Medical School for a 2-year clinician scientist fellowship training program in cardiac anesthesia. Dr. Stafford-Smith remained at Duke University upon completion of his training, where he's now a professor in the Department of Anesthesiology with tenure. His other current roles at Duke include Vice Chair of Education and Director of Fellowship Education. In 2018, Dr. Stafford-Smith was awarded Duke's Master Clinician Teacher Award. His national education leadership roles include being the chair of the Society of Cardiovascular Anesthesiologists Cardiothoracic Anesthesia Fellowship Directors Committee, the president of the Anesthesiology Fellowship Program Directors Association, and a member of the ACGME Cardiothoracic Anesthesiology Milestones Committee. We're so glad to have him with us today. Our second panelist today is Dr. Judith Hellman, who will be speaking to us about developing an academic research career in anesthesiology. Dr. Hellman earned her medical degree at Columbia University and completed anesthesiology residency and critical care fellowship training at Massachusetts General Hospital. Following her clinical training, Dr. Hellman remained at MGH, where she completed a T32 postdoctoral research fellowship as well. Currently, Dr. Hellman is a professor with tenure in the Department of Anesthesia and Perioperative Care at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Hellman is an exceptional example of a physician scientist. She has over 150 peer-reviewed publications and has maintained R01 level funding since the year 2000. She has received a Presidential Citation for Excellence by the Society of Critical Care Medicine not once, but 5 times, and has served as a special emphasis panel member on multiple NIH study sections, as well as a full-time member of the NIH Surgery, Anesthesia, and Trauma Study section. Dr. Hellman also serves as the Vice Chair of Research and the Director of Research Training Programs at UCSF, and is the Program Director for their Departmental T32 Training Grant. At the national level, she served as the chair of the Society of Critical Care Medicine Research Committee, as a member of the American Society of Anesthesiologists Research Committee, and as the clinical science counselor for the Shock Society. We're really glad to have her with us today as well. Our third panelist is Dr. Tony Jones, and he will be speaking to us about building a leadership-focused career in anesthesiology. Dr. Jones completed his medical school training at the University of Alabama School of Medicine. He completed his residency and subspecialty training in neuroanesthesia at the Mayo Clinic, and also completed an NIH-supported research fellowship there. He then joined their faculty at the Mayo Clinic, where he remained until the year 2006. In 2006, Dr. Jones was selected to be the Alfred Havey Professor and Chair of Anesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where his leadership roles just continued to grow. He was selected to be the Senior Associate Dean of Clinical Affairs at their School of Medicine and the President of the University of Alabama Health Services Foundation. In 2017, due to his exceptional leadership skills, Dr. Jones became the inaugural Chief Physician Executive of UAB Medicine. As the Chief Physician Executive, Dr. Jones is responsible for the oversight, collaboration, integration, and strategy between the UAB Health System, the UAB School of Medicine, and the University of Alabama Health Services Foundation's Board of Directors. As the Chief Physician Executive, Dr. Jones focuses on maximizing practice efficiency and productivity, improving quality and patient safety by promoting integration of the clinical service lines they have, and developing an innovative value-added care model. As you have heard, our 3 panelists have built exceptional careers in their chosen areas of anesthesia, and we are extremely fortunate to have them share their time and their insights with us this morning. Therefore, without further ado, I will thank them all for joining us and turn the podium over to them. Thank you all.
Thank you for my invitation to this interesting session, and I'll be talking to you about the education career. I have no disclosures or any plan to discuss any off-label or investigational uses. What I do want to cover is the career of the emerging education scholar, both inquiring whether you are a person who has that educator itch, what it takes to design an education career. I'll touch on the 3 phenotypes that I think exist in education. We'll talk about the career phases and how you plan through those, the phenotypes that we talked about and some of the challenges they pose, and then maybe some late career destinations that you'll see many educators find in their pathway. Well, what about setting the stage for scholarly activity beyond clinical care? Look, we all have backgrounds and responsibilities that are part of life. Superimposed on this, we add our work, and let's call that the clinical training. And what I'd like to imagine, if you look at these blue sections, they represent that pluripotent scholarly energy that makes for an academic career, I would suggest. Although there are many in private practice who do very creative jobs too, but I'm going to refer to here this pluripotent scholarly energy is where we find the educator itch. For many, I would say that the first inkling that they have that kind of passion comes when they are in their own training and they find themselves teaching those who are, for example, more junior residents, medical students, other individuals, and they identify the satisfaction out of seeing others learn. But there are all sorts of other ways in which people discover this passion. I won't get too detailed about the education focus, but I'm sure it's already become clear to you in your own careers. There are all sorts of audiences and there are all sorts of different expertises which represent the destination of people who identify as educators, even researchers who teach upcoming researchers are educators. So all sorts of places where you can find your focus in education. So once you've identified that one element of your career is going to be in academics as an educator, and you've identified a potential for focus in terms of a target audience and location or type of education, then comes these elements that are first intrinsic, and that is, the career vision you have for your career. What have you done in terms of self-directed growth towards being an educator? But then there are these other aspects like the extrinsics, such as, who are your mentors? Who have shown you through their role modeling what kinds of careers are appealing to you? And then even within your own location, within your own academic department, what are the open doors? What are the opportunities for education in your environment? So once you take those elements and then you filter them through these main missions that overlap with an education career, and I propose those are primarily in the sort of leadership administration area, education focus proper on its own, and then research, you come out the other end with a phenotype. So let's examine these potential phenotypes. Well, the first and maybe most evident or obvious to many of us are those who end up in education leadership. And the most obvious of those are the teaching programs, even the ones we just finished graduating from ourselves, residencies, fellowships, and so on. So in other words, program leadership. The second I would suggest to you comes in terms of those who are actually more driven by their interest in education process. This might even involve an interest in the research of education process. For example, we are innovating education regularly, and probably many of you have been in the presence of the concept of flipping the classroom. Well, that is an education innovation that came from educators who are interested in the process of education. And many of them are researchers and such as well. And then finally, I would suggest that there are many educators, in fact, who are actually co-driven by their interest in research, be that clinical research, bench research, but they see education as an outlet for disseminating their research and being educators of all sorts of audience as about an issue or an area of their research. So these, I would say, are the three main phenotypes of educators. For regardless of the phenotype which you may envision yourself in, the strategies in the early career, I think, are very much the same. Firstly, many sticks in the fire, not only for topics, but certainly at this point, you may already have identified a mentor, but for many, it's trying out different mentors, growing those relationships and seeing which ones seem to fit best. I would emphasize very much at this point, it's certainly not about the title. In fact, the title should be the last thing, frankly, in your primary list of issues. But what I would target is to begin some form of scholarly activity in the form of publications. Be this in peer-reviewed journals, that would be ideal, but also in terms of book chapters or other educational materials. But above all, this is a very important part of your career to personally invest in. If you are investing, you will find others will invest in you, and we will get back to that in just a moment. Other considerations in terms of developing yourself, seek mentors. Seek maybe one primary mentor, which works for some people, or several mentors for different components of the whole, which is your career development. Consider skills advancement. This might be part of an onboarding package. It might be something you propose or discuss with your division chief or your chair. For example, some individuals, especially if the process of education is what fascinates them, may seek a master's in education. All the time you're gaining the skills of efficiencies. Potentially, for example, learning how to align your activities so that they superimpose, so that maybe your clinical activity might overlap with your subspecialty research topic, or your education research as it relates to the trainees that you're working with. At the same time, as you evolve into your early career, you'll find as you get later on that some of the skills are no longer putting more sticks in the fire, but learning how and when to say no to some of the projects. Clearly, that tends not to be the case when the chair asks you to do something, but in a general sense, to begin to narrow down your focus. Speaking of the chair, that might be a person you might be negotiating with for resources or investment in your career. It might be others. It might be your division chief. It might be an award negotiation for a grant or something of that nature. But in this regard, reflect that past behavior predicts future behavior, and others are going to look for evidence of your personal investment before they consider investing in you. And as suggested by this cartoon, those who show evidence of more personal investment are more likely to get more investment over longer periods of time from others. And don't forget that it's not about asking people for support and then doing something. To the extent you show enthusiasm and evidence of results, you will find others investing in you. What about your mid-career? Well, some of the principles stay very much the same. Keep personally investing. But at this point, I think one of the changes is that you're beginning to seek collaborators. And I would say particularly collaborators that show, in addition to yourself, that they are effective, that they are achieving things so that collaboratively you can create more. This is a time to begin to seek time support for what you're doing in terms of potentially leadership roles. Maybe a trainee leadership role. So for example, a program director or an associate program director role, residency or fellowship. I would propose at this point, you are beginning to trip over challenges which are occurring for all people in their mid-career. And some sort of leadership development, learning how to deal with management issues, learning how to grow groups and teams is extremely helpful. I certainly found it that way. It continues to not be about the title. Titles will come. Don't worry about those things. You develop yourself and others will give you titles. Continue your academic work in terms of primary publications per year, but maybe start to consider including co-authors or co-workers who are outside of the institution, certainly outside of your department, and look for individuals who, while you are taking on the primary responsibility for these two publications, are in collaboration with you and with your input, including you in their co-authorships as well, so that collectively you're moving things forward for each of you. Mentoring continues to be very important, and as we talked about in terms of leadership development, personal development might include also growing your spectrum of skills through maybe an advanced degree, maybe by taking other courses, or maybe even through some professional coaching if that's available to you. These are all things that I think a lot of leaders have had and gained from. In terms of mentorship, not only are you becoming more developed through being mentored, but this is a time when you become a mentor. And in fact, you are probably, whether you realize it or not, developing your own team. And keep in mind that relationships are in many cases just part of the pleasure of being an academic faculty. and many of your trainees, you're providing coaching and mentorship without any sort of expectations, but also realize that some of the mentorship roles you take on are also with individuals who might become part of your team, where you're actually gaining by growing their careers because they are actually helping support the development of your own career in various ways. And continue to see that your focus is sort of sufficiently narrowing that you're not being diluted too much and fewer sticks might be available. In terms of the types of phenotypes we talked about, each one has its own set of challenges. For example, the education leader who is so engrossed in running their program will struggle sometimes to produce scholarly activity. And that will challenge promotion, because promotion is not based only on leadership program management. The individual who is focused in education for its purity, the development of education programs and so on, these are a relatively uncommon breed per se. They should be meritoriously promoted based hopefully on their scientific output, bearing in mind though that academic support for competitive funding in education is relatively modest compared to some of the other types of support that's available out there for research. The research individual whose interest in educating merits their research should have no problems with promotion, but might at this point beginning to be struggling with bandwidth, particularly if their research career is taking off as well, because the challenge for excellence is that you are being demanded of in both directions, and a jack of all trades is master of none. So you may find that one of the two of these has to take on a secondary role if both have been taking a front role. Some people can manage both of these, and so that's not necessarily the case. Some of the perennial challenges in education, determining excellence, promotion, as we mentioned, and the lack of tenure track in many institutions for educators is one issue, although I think there's continued attention being paid to that. And the challenge in terms of using teaching scores to define excellence. They're not a peer-reviewed equivalent. And there is some potential for some people who give honest feedback to have that reflect in their teaching scores, not necessarily always in a positive way. And then how do you balance the equivalent teaching scores from a 4-day versus a 1-day-a-week clinician who's a clinician educator? Education is always seen as a cost center, or most of the time as a cost center by the chair. And that's not something to apologize for, but relative to many of the things a chair does, the business argument for education is always a little bit of a challenge to add education topics or costs to the budget. And another aspect is that the clinical mission is what floats the boat of most departments, all departments, frankly. And so the education mission has to adapt in many cases to changes in the clinical mission, which seems to be particularly pertinent in our era. All this being said, there are many excellent late career destinations for academic educators. You can see them listed here all the way through departments and institutions to national forums. So in summary, I hope I've portrayed that the education pathway is a very, very viable and highly satisfying option as an academic career. And as we highlighted, there are many diverse opportunities, both in terms of pathways and in terms of endpoints for academic educators. I've proposed 3 phenotypes, although most people represent some sort of hybrid of these. They each carry predictable challenges, but most of those are solvable. There are lots of examples across the board of late career educator successes. And I would propose in terms of the future that healthcare expansion that appears imminent and or continuing will oblige more patients, but also more trainees. And so there's a rich set of opportunities for the education pathway to continue to grow, particularly as maybe research funding is gradually going to decline. And we need good destinations for excellent academic faculty. And increased education research may be the exception to the education budget, given that we're expecting expansions in education overall. So I'll leave it there and very much look forward to entertaining your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Judith Hellman, the Vice Chair for Research in the Ucsf Department of Anesthesia and Perioperative Care. I want to thank the organizers of the IARS, AUA, SOCCA, and eSAS 2021 Scholars Day virtual meeting for inviting me to present at this panel on finding your academic path. My talk is focused on research pathways in anesthesia. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, and my current research funding comes from several sources and is geared towards my own research program as well as the research training of anesthesiologists. First off, I want to convey how well anesthesiologists are positioned to make important contributions to scientific discovery and knowledge and to the advancement of healthcare. As you all know, anesthesiologists play key roles in multiple clinical domains and care for diverse populations of patients. They have deep expertise in respiratory and cardiovascular physiology and management, in the pharmacologic management of shock, sedation, consciousness, and other processes, and in using complex real-time data to personalize the moment-to-moment management of patient care. Anesthesiologists have the tools and expertise to do basic, translational, and clinical research on human health and on a wide range of diseases and disorders. Importantly, anesthesiologists function extremely well as members of multidisciplinary collaborative teams, and in that sense are really ideally suited towards participating in and leading team science. This slide depicts the wide range of research areas that fall under the purview of anesthesia and the perioperative sciences. For the purpose of trying to develop structure within the UCSF research program, and to help trainees build individualized training programs, we came up with these 7 broad areas of research being done by faculty and trainees in our department. Although there may be additional categories that aren't called out here, I think that these basically reflect the broad research areas in the field of anesthesia. It's important to note that there will be variability in the types of research being done in anesthesia departments at different institutions. The specific focuses and areas of research strength need to be taken into account when you choose your research direction, project, and mentors. Analogous to the last slide, research in anesthesiology and the perioperative sciences is done in multiple venues, including in the operating rooms, but also in non-OR patient care locations, such as the ICU and pain management clinics and endoscopy suites and other places, and also in wet research labs, clinical labs, and dry labs. This flow chart shows the many different stages at which one can enter anesthesia research, as well as potential training pathways in some of these stages, and ways that clinician researchers ultimately set up their research and clinical balance. Individuals that join our research training program have a wide range of backgrounds. Some started in research as early as high school, did PhDs or master's degrees, or even postdoctoral research fellowships. Some have done very little research or have done a limited amount of research, but they haven't engaged in a research-intensive program yet. They all share a strong desire to get involved in anesthesia research. We encourage them to get involved in research projects during residency or fellowship. Residents in our categorical or standard residency program have the opportunity to do research time during their CA2 or CA3 years. And residents that are in our extended research scholars training pathway have a more intensive, long residency or research intensive residency program, but it's also extended. It's also possible to take a break from research to do clinical training and then to return to research at a later stage. So regularly, people do MD, PhDs, then take a break from research during their training as residents and clinical fellows, and then they rejoin research in an intensive way after they've completed their clinical training. I show in the green box the possibilities for balancing research and clinical work. One can have a research-heavy career that involves, say, 60 to 80% research, an equal split of research and clinical work, or a career that is primarily clinical but does involve doing some usually clinically oriented research. Illustrated in this slide are the research pathways in the UCSF Department of Anesthesia. The structure we set up takes into account the diversity of interests and backgrounds of our faculty and trainees. There are many research and many anesthesia research training programs across the country that have analogous research pathways. And I think this is a helpful way to think about the different ways of getting involved in anesthesia research and doing training. The PSI, or the Pathway to Scientific Independence, shown in green, is a research-heavy pathway that can be entered as early as during residency or right after completing clinical training. We take advantage of our T32 postdoctoral fellowship program to provide PSI trainees with protected research time during the first 2 to 3 years after completing their clinical training. And we continue to support them through their time as early faculty up until and through their independence, attainment of independence. The alternative pathways shown in yellow involve lower percentages of research time. These pathways do include research training and mentoring, and there is one formal training option in the alternative pathways, the clinical instructorship with research training, which provides 40 to 50% protected research time. There is movement between these pathways. Some people join our PSI during residency or as T32 fellowships, but after they finish their training, they decide to move to a more equally balanced career. And others join at a 50-50 research commitment or even a lesser time commitment, but then they get activated by their research program and their research productivity, and they move to the PSI. There are a variety of funding mechanisms available to early stage anesthesia researchers. The list here is illustrative, but is not exhaustive. Typically, residents are supported by their departments, and they may receive support through fellowship grants, for instance, through FAIR, or through NIH postdoctoral T32 fellowship programs. Postdoctoral research fellows may also be supported by T32 programs and through IARS and FAIR mentored grants. Junior faculty are often supported by mentored research training grants through FAIR and IARS, NIHK programs, and grants from organizations such as the Society of Critical Care Medicine. In the latter years, junior faculty may be competitive for NIH R21 or R01 level grants. The assumption during the training period is that the department and the mentor will also help to support the trainee's research project and their training. A number of factors are needed to succeed in anesthesia research. First, there needs to be strong commitment from all of the stakeholders, the trainee, the department, the institution, and the mentor. There needs to be outstanding mentors, including research and career mentors. There needs to be structured, individualized training. The training program should involve coursework in appropriate areas, writing, workshops, regular presentations of data, and participation in research meetings, and regular check-ins with training program leadership. And finally, and this is no easy task, there needs to be a strong research direction and project. How one goes about choosing a research project and direction is highly individualized. A lot of factors influence the choice of research direction. These include intrinsic interest in a research topic or disorder, one's experiences in life, what's going on in research, what kind of environment you're working in, what your clinical interests are, your abilities, and how you want to balance your career and your life. I want to provide the eSAS scholars, I want to provide the early stage anesthesiology scholars with some suggestions to consider relative to finding your research pathways. First, pick a research area and topic that excites you. You're more likely to be motivated and to succeed in topics and projects that fascinate you. And your excitement will help to sustain you through the inevitable struggles that arise in research. Pick a project that you can do in the time that you have to do it. Make sure that you have all of the resources available, including laboratory and computational resources, data sets, and personnel, advisors, and mentors. Explore different research options before you commit. Explore different projects. Meet with multiple potential mentors. Consider doing short rotations in a couple of different research settings. Don't lock yourself into an area, topic, project, or long-term mentor too early. Carefully choose your mentor. The importance of your research mentor can't be overstated. Meet with several mentors or potential mentors. Attend lab meetings or research group meetings. And think about things like, do you find their work interesting? Have they mentored physician scientists successfully? Are you comfortable with interacting with them and their team? Think about how you want to balance clinical and research work. The viability and success of some research projects and pathways depends on the amount of time you have to devote to research. Related to this, it can be very helpful to align your clinical and your research focuses. Your clinical experiences can guide and inform the research topics and specific questions that you want to pursue. Also, national meetings often have research and clinical components, so there's an efficiency in aligning these two areas. I strongly recommend that you develop an individualized career development plan. This is an example of a career development plan that we have T32 research program trainees fill out on entry into the program and then on a yearly basis. It includes sections describing the structure of the mentoring team and the research advisory committee, short and long-term scientific and career goals, didactic and informal training, descriptions of ongoing and planned research projects, and various milestones. The CDP helps to crystallize different aspects of your research training program. Get advice from supervisors and advisors, potential mentors, former mentors, faculty in fields of interest, your peers, and people like me, the vice chairs for research in your departments. To summarize, there are many ways to incorporate research into an academic career, and anesthesiologists can get involved in research at different career stages. It's not too late to enter or to re-enter research. Anesthesiologists can uniquely contribute to scientific and medical knowledge and to the advancement of healthcare. Research training necessitates commitment and focus. I want to stress again how important it is to have outstanding mentors that understand how to train physician scientists who are balancing clinical work and research. Many anesthesia departments have strong research training programs and faculty engaged in cutting-edge research. Find out about these resources as you develop your research training and career plan. Thank you, and I look forward to interacting with you at our panel discussion.
Welcome to the panel, Finding Your Academic Path. The title of my presentation is So You Want to Be a Leader. I was chair of the Department of Anesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine for about 11 years, prior to ascending into this current role about 3.5 years ago, the inaugural Chief Physician Executive of our health system. This position was created in large part because of a deepening realization that there's great value in academic physician leaders at the apex of our organization. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this very important subject. I do not have any disclosures, and nor do I have anything included in terms of off-label or investigative use. This slide is a list of our learning objectives. So this is a very broad subject. So to help make this very meaningful, I would like to start speaking broadly about the differences between leadership versus that of management, but then narrow the scope to do a deeper dive into what I've observed as some of the most difficult competencies for leaders to master, the competencies of resilience, adaptation, and conflict management. There will be a number of books that I'll pepper through the presentation just to provide some additional context and information for you to access after we leave the meeting. So as we go through this presentation, I'd like for you to think of a leader who inspired you. So what is leadership versus management? So essentially this slide says leadership produces change and movement, whereas management produces order and consistency. Whereas a leader establishes direction and creates vision, sets strategy. It's going to be important from a management standpoint that there is good planning and budgeting, establishing agendas, allocating resources. And you can read through the rest of these, but you can imagine, as a department chair, setting a tripartite vision for what you want the department to accomplish. Is got to be supported by a compensation model that supports that development of that culture. So management skills are very important. They are one of the most important competencies of leadership, but they are not one and the same. I wanted to share with you this textbook written by David Dibble. In this book, David describes the science behind what he calls the 4 agreements and 7 tools that produces bottom-up and frontline driven system-based leadership. The 4 agreements are shown here. Find your higher purpose. I'll tell you that this is one of the more important things that you spend time thinking about if you're interested in ascending an organization into leadership. I know I had to when I decided was contemplating, if you will, leaving the department chair and stepping into my current role. Why was I wanting to do it? What were my core values and what was my passion? Why take on this role? Grow and serve your people. That's critically important. If you don't care, you can't lead. I spent much of my time in my department chair role focusing on what is it that my faculty have a passion and what excites them in the morning. And then figuring out how they can align that passion with what the department or institution needs are. Lean into the core problems, don't ignore them. Solve them from the bottom up by including your frontline leaders so that those problems are owned by them and are then sustainable. And you'll learn all about the tools you can utilize and to do that in this textbook. And then pursue mastery. I still have an executive coach. I still study leadership, not only on my own, but with other people in the organization as well. Leading and managing will create, leading change will create stress, and it will create conflict, and you will have setbacks and in some cases failures. And speaking with one of our most successful chairs at UAB, in a conversation, a leadership conversation, she and I and some of our earlier career leaders were having here at UAB, she was asked, what has been the experience of being a chair? And she answered by saying, well, it's a series of life-threatening experiences. Now, of course, they weren't life-threatening, but what she was referring to is that by leading change, you will undergo these sort of things, and in some cases, failure. And the key is that developing some of the key leadership competencies is that of resilience and that of the ability to adaptation. And so those of you know me know that I'm a old Western movie buff. This depiction on the left here is a remake of a movie called True Grit. Starring Jeff Bridges and Haley Steinfeld. And if you want to enjoy a movie, but also get a really clear understanding of what resilience is, enjoy it. I think you'll come out of that with a deep understanding. But the definition, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, or significant sources of stress. Again, probably won't have trauma as a leader, but you very well have setbacks and stress. Ability to recover from setbacks, constructively sustain your efforts despite these missteps and setbacks are key. This book by Spencer Johnson does a great job of really talking about the key elements and how to build adaptation. It's called Who Moved My Cheese. It's basically a fable of four mice that live in a maze, and someone moved their cheese to a different spot. And they go through the different ways in which people adapt to change. Excellent textbook. I'll end this slide by just a quote from Jeff Boss, who I'll talk about more in a minute. But he has this quote that says, "It is not possible to be prepared for anything, but it is possible to be prepared to respond to anything." And the key point here, and that does begin with yourself. So this is unequivocally for me one of the best books about navigating chaos, or navigating stress, and having mental discipline to do so. He was a Navy SEAL for 13 years, clearly understands about navigating chaos and stress. 4 Bronze Stars and with Valor and 2 Purple Hearts, and you can see from the other text on this slide the other things that he has done. And certainly Google his name, you'll be very impressed. I love the way he starts the book because he talks about this concept of the Inkwell lobster trap. And essentially, this is just a picture of a lobster trap. And there's a chamber over here in which they place the bait, and you can see where you can enter a wider opening, and it has a narrow opening at the bottom here. And the lobster, in responding to the bait, will go through the trap, and they can't get out, and they become tomorrow night's dinner. The point they make is that there are 2 traps here. One is a behavioral response to the bait. The other is the physical limitations of a lobster because of its big claws and inflexible body. It can't get back out. The point of telling the story about the Inkwell lobster trap is concluded by saying the lobster just simply got trapped by being a lobster. And that's the point. We have our behavioral responses to all sorts of stimuli, much of which can lead us to binding situations. The key is that our reactions to the baits, if you will, or to the stimuli, the challenge or the stress, is actually within our control, how we respond. Dr. Okalami is a great story. If you want to read about him, go online. I met him about 3 years ago. He's a phenomenal story about adaptation and resilience. He was a Stanford undergrad and an athlete, and paralyzed from the chest down during his 3rd year in his orthopedic residency. Talk about adaptation. He is now a family medicine physician at the University of Michigan, and his primary care practice focuses on individuals with disability. I love his quote here at the bottom left, where he talks about being disabled does not mean inability. Adaptation and resilience is a competency that can be learned. The Kobayashi Maru, which is a scenario, the no-win scenario that Star Trek cadets used to go through just prior to completing their training as a captain of a starship. Had to go through this, and they almost always, if not always, resulted in failure. The point is that one can learn from failure. And they did this not to see if they can complete it, but they wanted to observe how they responded to it and use that as an opportunity to help them develop the ability to persist and endure even when they have failure. In this book, he talks about the 4 mental traps that will prevent you from developing resilient and adaptive leadership postures. I won't go through all these. They fit into the big 4 buckets here. And please go and read about them. He goes through them in excruciating detail in his textbook. The point is, he says that we are wired to be vulnerable to these traps. But through awareness and deliberate practice, we can better manage our reactions amidst uncertain situations. Conflict management. So this slide just depicts the 4 basic approaches to managing conflict. And you can see there are 4 quadrants. And on the X scale, there's, of course, concern for your relationships with others, from low to the left to high on the right. And then from the bottom to the top, low to high concerns for your own personal goals. The key here is that you want to be in the upper right, where you have high concern for those relationships, but you also have high concerns for attaining and executing on the mission, your goals. And in conflict management, the main goal is to create cooperative or win-win scenarios. Any of the other 4 groups will undermine either your relationships or your goals of the organization, or both. One thing to note is that not all the time can you have success with conflict. I had a motto in my department that helped me move early in my career from the accommodative approach to that of the cooperative approach, is that nobody's more important than the mission, right? And so sometimes individuals may have to leave because their behavior or the conflict is inconsistent with the mission. This is an assertive communication formula that I use a lot and mentor and advise many to use, called DESC, D-E-S-C. And it's just a formula that I use, and I will actually write up a script when I'm going to go in using this formula to have difficult conversations with people. Where I will describe the D with what happened, and I always focus on the immediate situation. Don't go back to something that happened 3 weeks ago. Focus on the immediate. Express how this situation made you feel. Make it personal. Specify what you would like to see happen. Again, valuing that relationship with them. And then convey to them a positive consequence. If you do X, then these are the positive things that can happen going forward. So with that said, I'd just like to summarize by saying that leadership does change. Leadership produces change. And while management does produce order and consistency, they're both critical in effective leadership. Management skills are an important competency of leadership. Read the book by David Dibble. Bottom-up systems approach to leadership produces engaged and followers with sustained change, where those followers own the change. Resilience and adaptation are critically important leadership competencies when you're leading change, and that these competencies can indeed be learned. The first step in developing resilient and adaptive intelligence is to avoid the mental traps that lead to learned helplessness. Conflict management and resolution is stressful, but by deploying a very rigorous approach and disciplined approach to communication about conflict, can be very helpful and constructive for both you and your colleague. I'll end by just showing you a few additional textbooks that I personally have found very helpful in helping me grow as a leader. Our Iceberg is Melting is one of the best in terms of change management. John Cotter is the guru, and this does a nice job. It's a fable of penguins that are on an iceberg, and it's melting, and the penguins need to figure out how to change. And it goes through the 8 steps of change management. So I thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you're enjoying it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all 3 of our panelists. Those are amazing discussions. And I think that there are a lot of questions that we have for you all, if you're willing to answer a few for us this morning. The first question I have for the panelists is that For residents and early career faculty interested in leadership opportunities, can the speakers offer their thoughts on the usefulness of hybrid professional programs like MD, MBA, MD, MPH, etc.?
Where do you want to go first, Lauren?
Please, Dr. Jones.
Sure. Of course, I did not get a formal degree, but times are different, and I do think, without question, in my opinion, that is today, if this is a direction that you have an interest in terms of leadership, I highly do recommend looking into some training. My personal, when I was a chair, we created a program called LEAD, L-E-A-D, and it stood for Leadership, Education, and Development. And it was for our early scholars and actually our residents and fellows as well. But what we did is we actually identified what's called a Master's in Health Administration program. And we actually, with the support of our alums, funded getting that degree for our residents and trainees. We had only a certain number we can do every year. I think we actually had 4 slots. And I highly recommend the Master's in Health Administration relative to the MBA. This is, again, my personal opinion, because when you go in and look at the curriculum, it largely teaches leadership. That's essentially what it does, and management, and get real clarification in terms of what that is. In terms of running a business, most of the time as physicians, if you're going to ascend to leadership roles, you have someone who's an MBA you can go to, right? So I again, strongly recommend look into the curricula of the Master's in Health Administration. I think you might find it quite interesting and quite appropriate for what you are interested in doing from a leadership standpoint.
Thank you.
Oh, I'd love to add a comment there, Tony. It's fascinating to sort of hear your insights. Full confession, I actually have done an MBA, but my reason for doing it, and it was later in my career, I never actually imagined I'd do this, was because I found I couldn't encourage MBAs to understand me unless I could speak their language, because they found no entertainment in learning my language. But furthering the question, I think as it relates to the audience, I think it's a very individual choice as well. I mean, I totally agree with your points, Tony, in terms of how you can grow yourself as a leader by understanding the three-dimensional workings of a medical environment. But I think these are very selective. I mean, many of the people on this Zoom probably have developed their research skills through a PhD. I would say some people are visionary in terms of their, for example, administrative direction. And there, I'd say a sort of an advanced degree, for example, in IT, et cetera, is very well targeted. For some people, I think it takes moving along a little bit before they get the sense of what is the degree that would enhance where they're going. So I do think it shouldn't be the cart before the horse. In other words, I think know where your direction is, and then pick what's going to enhance that, rather than picking a degree and hoping in the end that that'll sort of help you as you grow.
Yep, absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Our second question from our group is there an IDP that you have for those of us starting residency versus being at the fellowship level? And can you share them with us?
That's probably, since I brought up the IDP, one for me to answer. We don't have a formal IDP that we have, our residents fill out, but we're actually working right now to try to expand our career development plan sort of outside of just our early research trainee and 32 program, and to have something that our research faculty, especially at sort of the pre-RO1 stage, it really incorporates some of the other really important kind of aspects of an anesthesiologist scientist's career. such as how they want to do their clinical, work and what their sort of mentoring is all around, and not just their research mentoring. And I think that, were you to develop something for residents, that would need to be incorporated into their whole IDP, and that would be for the researchers, and obviously for people who want to develop into education and leadership. There would need to be sort of tweaked, or perhaps there could be something that sort of had each of those components that was a little bit more standardized. But I think it's a great idea, and something to consider doing. Thank you.
I think this is one for all three of you. There was a question about negotiating onboarding packages. Sort of what is reasonable and when should those negotiations begin was the question.
Who wants
maybe I can start from, I think for those in programs, we have one that resembles the one Judith described, where trainees are growing themselves. That transition into the faculty, we try to portray as you are growing a portfolio that you are bringing to the chair to propose by evidence of investment in yourself and by your track record that you deserve that investment from the rest of the department. And so I don't know that it's a cookie cutter. You should expect this in your negotiation, as much as whatever stage you find yourself, you should consider what is it that's going to be the evidence that I need to portray from my side, which suggests I'm worthy of that next investment. I mean, I'd be interested in the views of the others, but I think that worthiness and what you bring to the table is what's going to demonstrate that you're worthy of that investment.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think in terms of, that your chairman or the leadership is going to be looking at how important is this to you, and how much kind of, passion do you have for doing this? And that's really evidenced by what you've done. So, I think coming in sort of with a combination when you do start having those meetings of what are you going to do that is going to develop you also into somebody who is going to lead, is going to be a future leader, and is going to, help with developing the next generations after you is part of it. And if it's not that, if it's that you're just a very hardcore researcher, that's what you want to do. You want to do that for 80% of your time, the time for the rest of your career. Then you need to sort of build up something that makes that look like it's feasible to your chair beyond the period of time that they give you support, so that they can see where that investment is going to, lead to somebody who might make really important discoveries and will somehow help with the direction of the department. And, I'd say that it depends on who you are when those discussions should begin. So a lot of it may have to do with how well formulated your plan is. So, you shouldn't go as a CA1 with a bunch of ideas of what you want to do, but knowing you want to stay on as faculty there. But if you're a CA1 who knows exactly who you want to work with and where your research career is going and what you want to do, and you've already done a postdoc, then you might be in a different position where you may be having earlier discussions, and because you've already got some of a proven track record. But if, my own experience was a little bit later on. It was sort of during my CA3 year that I began having very serious discussions, or towards the end of my CA2 year with my chair, about what was going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I entirely agree with Mark and Judith. I don't have a whole lot to add. In fact, everyone at UAB knew that we had a motto in terms of this question, which is we'll invest in those willing to invest in themselves, right? And it just sort of reflects the comments that Judith made. I'll just add one other piece to this, is that I use the word we will invest because it's not Tony, the chair. The resources of the department belong to the faculty. And so a big part of what we did is make sure that we put in place, very clear tracks, if you will, in terms of their research and academic interest and development. And we created, baseline sets of resources that can be invested in individuals who, quote unquote, enter into those tracks. And with an understanding that it's 80-20, right? That's the baseline. And then there are all sorts of nuances that a chair has to consider that can actually be modified from that baseline approach. But what that does is it enabled everyone to understand what the expectations are, what the goals and objectives, and there's a great transparency, okay? And I'll just tell you that transparency is really important because it's not difficult, quite frankly. It's not uncommon for inequities that can emerge within an organization in terms of resource distribution. And this helped us be able to do so in a very disciplined, transparent, and organized way.
Thank you all. I have another one that I hope you all will contribute to answering for us. And that is that one of our attendees wants to know about any possible major setbacks you might have had during your early career and how you navigated those to get to the amazing places you all are today.
Yeah, I'll start with that one because I have so many. When you guys have, I'm sure all of you heard that the comment, what got you here won't necessarily get you there. When I made the transition from a clinician scientist, when I left Mayo to come here, I was a PI on a T32. I had 2 R01 grants and was a co-investigator on a third. And when I became the department chair, I thought it was just, do more of that, right? And it turns out it was nothing like that. And the biggest failure I had and setback was that over the course of about 2 or 3 years, and of course I was moving from Minnesota to Alabama, and I actually was not able to bring 1 or 2 of my key individuals that were able to come with me that were, some of the scientists that were my key collaborators. So it was literally transitioning and coming and basically having to start all over. And at the same time, coming into an environment that required a whole lot of my time and energy. And so over about a 2 or 3 year period, it just became clear to me I was not going to be able, I had to make a choice. I was not going to be able to continue my career as a clinician scientist, which I love, still love, okay, to this very day. And so not being able to maintain that aspect of my career was unfortunately a setback. I wouldn't say it was a failure, but certainly a setback for me personally in terms of what I wanted to do. But what I also clearly realized is, again, getting back to the adaptation piece, is that much of what I learned as a scientist, the way I think, the discipline about asking and answering questions, actually became a strength for me as I began to innovate around how to optimize our care delivery system. It is the same, very same questions. And now, to the extent that in my current role as Chief Physician Executive, is that I am the principal of leading our entire organization, becoming a learning health system. It is how to eliminate the concept of the false dichotomy of academics or research and excellence in clinical care and merging them, right? And from a whole health system standpoint. So while that was a setback for me, I was able to take those same skills, just apply them a lot differently. And it had a significant impact on my ability to advance into my current role.
Gosh, also it's hard to, out of the many setbacks that have happened, I think that is one of the messages here, is that there are many setbacks that will happen along the way in a career, and or they'll feel like setbacks. And I think they often do happen when you're in a shift in your career, either from stage to stage, or you move, or both. You move and you take on a new position. There is going to be an inevitable change in your productivity and output if you're a researcher during that period of time, unless you are so far advanced that you can have sort of an empire to keep it going, and so it doesn't look that way. And how does that manifest? Well, it manifests as difficulties with renewing grants and things like that. And so I think that was one of my first setbacks. I moved and that was in 2008. I didn't have a strong appreciation for how much I really needed to get things set up and logically figure out when the RO1 was going to happen. And I sort of took on a lot of responsibilities at the same time. And, I lost that RO1 actually, just, so that was a very big setback for me. And how did I manage it? And at various different stages in my career, I've had to do this, to sort of step back and say, well, what went wrong here? What am I not, it seems like the project is fine and all that, but what have I done wrong? And I could identify some things that I had done wrong. And the big one was getting overextended and not appreciating how much time I really needed. And I have to say that that's something that I've revisited multiple times since then. I remind I've now gotten to the point where I proactively remind myself when I am taking on a new responsibility that's substantial, that I have to consider this in what the other things that I'm doing. And, there is often, as Dr. Jones just said, something that you end up giving up. It may be your research, it may be something that is near and dear to you, but that you need to figure out how to shift to somebody who's more junior that can take a grasp on that for a number of years and do it. So I hope that answers the question.
It's very interesting how parallel our observations are and maybe how different maybe the outcomes are. But so I arrived at Duke into a cardiothoracic division where so many people were so funded that every single patient was enrolled in a trial already. So I became I had done a research fellowship. I was very keen, and so I joined in by essentially hybridizing myself, noticing that serum creatinine was drawn on every patient, but was not being used. In fact, the kidney was just being appreciated as another victim of cardiac surgery. So I had the opportunity to participate in a lot of trials by adding creatinine as an outcome. But the sort of trade-off was that serendipitously, my summer job every year prior to this had been running sailing schools. So I actually knew, whether I deliberately planned this or not, the trade of running training programs. And so we had a cardiac fellowship, and I took that on. And I actually really enjoyed it as well, of course. What happened was the fellowship, which I took on, had 3 fellows. It grew to 14 fellows. Other things continued to expand, including my research. I actually was briefly RO1 funded, but then the Iraq War took away the funding before it arrived. But at that point, I sort of had to make some decisions. And in summary, obviously, you can see where I ended up. So my research became something I truly enjoyed, but I collaborated with others who were more committed to the research side, and I had to make a compromise. And there were moments where that involved grieving, I must admit. But at the same time, I so totally enjoy what I do in terms of education, and continue to have collaboration with researchers and continue to be an active publisher. So it's different solutions to that increasing set of demands that grows. Maybe the moral of the story is don't try and grow up too soon.
Can I just add one comment to both what Mark and Judith have both said in their presentation and their comments that I just want to reemphasize, because I didn't say it in my presentation. But you're early in your career, and many of you are interested in academic medicine. You need to focus. You need to prioritize, and the other stuff will come, right? And the best advice I got from my mentor when I was beginning my academic career was say no to everything that isn't going that isn't directly aligned with your research passion and interest. Don't become the medical director of this. Don't start grabbing stuff, right? Focus like a lesbian on yourself and your academic career, and then wake up one day about 10 years later, right after you're a full professor, and be thinking about some of the other things. So it's not absolutely exclusive, but don't do things that are going to derail you from your current goals of being an academic physician. That's got to come first.
Thank you all for those thoughts. We've really, really appreciated having you with us here this morning, giving of your Saturday morning selflessly to help us all begin to think about the exciting but a little bit daunting building of an academic anesthesiology career. We really appreciate you all coming.